Hello Dharma buddies, welcome to my channel Zen Confidential. I have my phone angled slightly higher today and I feel like a dog looking up at his master. Woof woof. Hello friends, welcome to Zen Confidential. I'm happy to see that people are signing up for this channel, subscribing, and view counts are going up for my videos. So it's cool to see that people are hopping on board and are actually interested in these topics that I'm interested in and that I talk about: Zen, creativity, the spiritual path. Not everybody is so interested in these topics though. I have a funny story that I want to tell you. Excuse me. And then I'm going to go shave because I look like an person. Okay, so I live in Vienna. And I spend so much of my life in bookstores, and now that I moved to Europe, it really hasn't changed. Whenever I get like 20 minutes, I just go and I sit in that space. It's very meditative for me to be surrounded to have walls of knowledge all around me. It's a little bit exhausting too, like all these thoughts, all the voices in a good bookstore, but it's also my home, really. And being here across the ocean, I like to find surrogate homes. So anyways, I walk into Shakespeare and Company. Now, as a brief aside, Shakespeare and Company is a very famous bookstore. It started on the banks of the Seine in Paris. A woman, I think her name was not Sylvia Plath, it was Sylvia something. Sylvia Beach, I think is her name. Anyways, long time ago, like back in the roaring 20s, when everybody was fleeing to Paris, and it was very cheap to live in Paris, and this American woman started a bookstore. And guess what? This bookstore became really famous and really central for a lot of writers like Hemingway and others who were running around Europe, living in France. And she wound up publishing James Joyce's Ulysses when nobody else would, because it's a dirty little book. Not little, it's 1,000 pages or so. But so anyways, apparently they branched out because there's also a Shakespeare Company here in Vienna. And I walked in there yesterday, and I want to tell you about a conversation I walked into. So there are 3 people, okay? There are 2 guys who work at Shakespeare Company, and then there's a woman buying a book. Now, I walk in and I see the woman buying the book, and she has this look on her face that, I don't know, it looks like she was fishing for approval from the 2 guys who work at Shakespeare Company behind the counter. But they didn't give her that approval. They were kind of irritated, I noticed. And she said something, a very sort of flowery and friendly goodbye, and walked out. They did not return her flowery and friendly goodbye. So naturally, I was curious as to what had happened. And I sat there in the recent paperbacks looking through them and waiting to hear these guys unpack the conversation they just had with this woman. So this was literally so imagine you've got a writer's room in Hollywood, and their job is, okay, guys, an ex-monk walks into a bookstore and he listens to 2 meatheads have a conversation wherein they totally misunderstand Buddhism. What would that sound like? That was what happened. I'm sitting there looking at these paperbacks, and these 2 guys who are, probably in their 50s, but they very much had a high fidelity 1996 used record store vibe to them. One of them's Austrian and one of them is American. And they start kind of this intense back and forth with each other. And then I hear the American say, all of life is suffering? I mean, what is she even talking about? He's referring to the one who was just in the store. What is she even talking about? Well, all of life isn't suffering. I mean, sometimes life sucks and other times it's joyous. And then the Austrian guy's like, yeah, she seems like totally uptight, yeah? And they're going back and forth like this for a while. And the Austrian guy's funny. He's wearing these pants that are like, I don't know how to describe them. Remember Austin Powers? He's wearing like neon green, neon pink, polyester, totally flared at the ankle, bell-bottom pants. Then just like a normal shirt, normal haircut, normal glasses. But from the waist down, he looks like a pimp from the 60s or 70s, right? So these two interesting guys are having this interesting conversation. And then the American guy was kind of pissed. He's like, yeah, I mean, so the Buddha just like leaves his wife and leaves his child and goes out into the world. Well, guess what? I've studied a little bit of Buddhism. The Buddha was rich. He was a prince. The Buddha was like the first trust funder. And the Austrian guy loved that. He said, yeah, Buddha was a trust funder. Yeah, you should tell her that next time she comes in here. So they went back and forth, basically misunderstanding Buddhism. And I listened to it happen. And there was a part of me that was like, I just so totally wanted to jump in and correct them. But of course I didn't, because it wasn't my place. Shaved, showered, monk face on, I'm ready to do this. Okay, so I tease this Austrian John Cusack and his American Jack Black counterpart, starring in the Vienna version of High Fidelity. I tease them, but only because I can see myself in them. It's not always easy to like find your way into Buddhism. And once you do find Buddhism and enter the stream, as they say, set out on the path, the way, it's kind of easy to get lost and to sort of stray from the path, or at least to find oneself wondering, what am I doing again? How does this sitting on a cushion, holding posture, relate to my job and my family? How does this all fit together again? How am I on the path? What does it mean? And to be sure, books are not going to give you the answer. All those beautiful books in Shakespeare and Company, although they don't have a big Buddhism section and they don't have my books, but nonetheless, you're never going to find it through words and books. So then what? So fortunately for us, we the uncertain ones, I think that a little bit of uncertainty about what it means to practice Buddhism and Zen is actually baked into the tradition itself. So now that I got through telling you that it can't be found in words, I'm going to share some thoughts from a neat little book called How to Practice Zazen, put out by the Institute for Zen Studies. Don't know who they are. And it is by Mumon Yamada Roshi. So Mumon Yamada was a teacher in the Rinzai Zen school, and he was a very wise and a very, very well-respected and famous Rinzai Zen teacher in Japan in the last century. But anyways, this is a neat little primer on practicing Zen, and it seems to me like Mumon Yamada was speaking in this little pamphlet to new practitioners. And to these new practitioners, he offers a way in to Buddhism and a way in to the practice. I'm going to give you 2 seconds to guess at what he said. How do you enter the path of Buddhism? Correct. He says, Zazen meditation is the most direct way to the truth of Buddhism. Okay, that's interesting. We can hold on to that, pause there, put that in, file that into the back of our cabinet in the brain, so that like when there's a moment when we're feeling lost or confused, oh, here's a pointer. Zazen, at least from the Rinzai Zen point of view, that's the best place to begin with Buddhism. It's the most direct way to the truth of Buddhism. Zazen. This is really interesting. I'm going to read this to you in full because he gently, simply, clearly and inexorably leads us to a very interesting place as a teacher. So let's read this. He says, recently, somebody asked me, is it useful to practice zazen even for a layperson? I replied, nope. Since man is an animal, for him to walk around is more normal. However, it is rather unusual for us to see a man who is walking in the true sense. Aren't many people simply walking from force of habit? Are they not moving simply by drawing and extending their legs? Whenever I read this, I get this image in my head of that movie with the Philip Glass soundtrack, Koyaanisqatsi. Squatsi. It's like, it's got this really intense, minimalistic classical music score going by Philip Glass, and it's showing people in the city, and they're all moving like these automatons. And it's sort of showing how it's a visual version of what Mumon Yamada is talking about here. We just move through our lives unthinkingly, uncontemplatively, and certainly in a non-Zen or a non-Buddhistic manner. So he's already beginning to equate walking the path with maybe taking what Dogen called the backwards step and beginning to contemplate how to commit to really live your life and live it authentically. Okay, so he says, are they not moving simply by drawing and extending their legs? Though they seem very busy in their daily lives, how many people are walking their own ways with a deep investigation into life? He goes on to tell a funny story with a heck of an impact. He says, at the time of World War II, I heard a funny story. Somebody saw many people standing in a queue waiting their turn and thought that there must be something rare. So it's like the World War II has ended. Everybody is dirt poor. My teacher told me about being in Japan at the end of World War II, and he said you literally saw people starving on the streets. I mean, they were eating rats and just garbage from garbage cans, extreme poverty. So the environment that Mumon Yamada is alluding to here is that. And so somebody told him a story about how they saw this line of people lined up. And so the guy thought, oh, there must be something good there. After a long while, he found himself waiting for somebody's funeral ceremony. Mumon Yamada goes on to say, if one enters college because others do, or marries because others do, one's life will not be one's own. To avoid such an irresponsible way of life, man must stop himself to discover the right way to advance. To stop and think quietly in such a way is nothing but zazen. That's really powerful, especially in our day and age when most of us can cobble together a living for ourselves and hopefully our loved ones, but oftentimes to do so, to provide, feels like a compromise. And we oftentimes, I find myself, and I know people that I know find themselves wondering, like, is this all there is to it? Putting food in my mouth so I have the energy to go to work, so that I can work really hard, so that I can get the paycheck, so that I can put food in my mouth, so I can work really hard, so I can get the paycheck. I worked after I sort of quietly quit the entertainment industry many years ago. I was doing odd jobs. A lot of it, I was like a Kelly girl. I was temping for a bunch of different companies. And at one point, there was a huge group of people, and I was one of them when we were temping for the Nielsen ratings agency. And we had to do some stupid thing where we were sitting there all day, like adding up the shows that people liked from these little brochures that they had filled out, you know. And we would all meet in the morning at 8 o'clock with our coffees and our lunch pails, and in the lobby downstairs, and then we would ride the elevator up together, all of us. It was like 10 of us. We'd pack into this elevator. You know, they'd buzz us up or something. I don't remember exactly what the deal was, but the security would let us through. We'd all ride up in the elevator together. And I remember one day we were all sitting down in the lobby and we were all having fun. We were all joking. We were all drinking our coffee, right? And then we get all packed in the elevator, and everybody starts to get quiet as the elevator's going ding, ding. And we're coming closer and closer and closer to our day working for the Nielsen Company, where we're going to get treated like cattle. And I remember there's an older woman, and she was in the very back of the elevator in a corner, and it was dead silent as we went from the final floor to before the one we were getting out at. And I'll never forget this. She said, "There's gotta be more to life than this." That statement, in many ways, is at the heart of the Buddhist path and at the heart of the search that we do. And it's right there for us at the beginning of this journey. There's got to be more to life than this. Just paying bills, eating, defecating, breeding, laughing at sitcoms, going to war, signing peace treaties, all this stuff. Like there has to be more to life than this. One comes to the path with that kind of a question, that kind of energy, and I think that's what Mumon Yamada is getting at here. So then he says, okay, well, you're supposed to sit and contemplate quietly. And then he says, what does one think of or contemplate while sitting quietly? What he should think of is his real self, who sees, listens, laughs, and cries. Okay, so what does that real self mean? Is he talking about like the authentic me? I used to remember when I was very, very young and I was an existentialist of sorts and I was searching for myself. I bought a book and it was a collection of existential essays, and the title of the book was Who Am I? So is that what Mumon Yamada is talking about here? He says, to think, who am I is zazen. Okay, what does he mean by that? To think, who am I is zazen? Am I sitting there on the cushion like just racking my brain for some essential self, some true and authentic me? Am I trying to find it? Isn't that a bit like a dog chasing its own tail? How does this work, Mumon? Tell us. He says in his next sentence, after you sit there and you think, who am I? He says, the result, and this is what he's really getting at here. And if you go back and watch this video, you can see the steps that Mumon Yamada is leading us down in the very beginning of his talk here. Or if you buy the book yourself, How to Practice Zazen, put out by the Institute for Zen Studies, you can read it yourself. He's leading to this sentence. In fact, everything in this book is probably leading to this sentence. He says, the result is the realization that not to think is the best thinking. In other words, the thing which one does not need to think of at all is his real self. I'll read the rest of this paragraph because I think it's instructive, and then we can unpack it together just a little bit before I get to my point. Okay, here we go. This is exactly what the Japanese Zen master Dogen once said. He said, think what you do not think. Okay? You might say, if one does not need to think, then why practice zazen? But this is not correct. The mind is not so simple. It is filled with so-called instinct, habit, thought, and intellectual judgment. These do not compromise the real self, but they delude the real self by arising from somewhere like a cloud or a fog. Therefore, they can be called illusion or ignorance. In clarifying such a mind, the real mind or the real self, by quiet sitting, we will find the real self where there is no fog of illusion nor clouds of ignorance, right? No furrowed brows. Have you noticed I have these indentations right here. It's from always going like this. I'm thinking. Okay, all right. Well, if I'd done zazen early in life, maybe I wouldn't have these. Because when you clarify your mind by quiet sitting, no fog of illusion, no clouds of ignorance. To live, I like this next line, to live brightly, correctly, and vitally in this realized true self is Zen itself. Zazen is the best way to acquire this quiet thinking and clarified mind. Now we come to the point of this practice and of this video. And the reason I wanted to make this video. I am like those guys in the bookstore. I am not a natural Buddhist. I love to overthink things. I love to squeeze all the juice out of the lemon of Buddhism and then jump over to Vedanta and see what Nisargadatta has to offer. And then maybe I will fling open the doors of esoteric contemplative Christianity and breathe in the cloud of unknowing and spend an evening with Neoplatonist Plotinus and then rediscover Nietzsche and then find Camus again and on and on. And then I wonder why I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning terrified of death. Right? Okay, but I forgive myself, and you should forgive yourself too. And if you have the kind of mind that can get distracted from the path, like me, then it's helpful to remember that one word, zazen. It can be a north star in this labyrinth of life that we're in, guiding us toward what Mumon Yamada called the most direct way to the truth of Buddhism. So as my mind likes to get distracted by all kinds of books at the amazing bookstore like Shakespeare and Company, when I'm sitting on the cushion and I'm doing my meditation practice, my mind also can get distracted. But it's a specific kind of distraction. I can find myself conveniently forgetting what zazen is. Zazen is very, very simple. You sit, you hold your posture, and you breathe in and you breathe out. Okay? That's it. That's it. And nothing else. No insights, no passing koans, no Nagarjuna or emptiness, no Mumon Yamada, none of this. What Mumon Yamada is alluding to here is the real self will manifest. Don't do it. You just do your job, which is hold your posture for 25 minutes. Breathe in and breathe out. Now he did mention those clouds of ignorance that arise inside of us. Remember that? Well, that's that thinking mind that arises. Well, if you're going to do your job and let your real self manifest for you, then it might help not to go on a tangent with those thoughts, i.e., indulge them. Might help to not do that, okay? It also might help to not get into a fight with your thinking. I just did this last night. I started fighting with myself to not think, and that was a process of thinking, and the cat chased its tail, okay? Rather, returning your attention, paying attentiveness to the breath. That attentiveness is so important, like these ancient Judeo-Christian religions wherein one brought a lamb to the altar and offered it to God, paid attention to God, slaughtered something that they had raised and that they planned to eat, but instead they offered it to God. Like, it's perhaps a bit of a violent example, but there is an attentiveness and a care and a seriousness and a focus and also a lightness that we bring to the cushion and a simplicity. And then the sit does itself. The sit happens very simply. Zen is not about anything you read in a book. It's not what my high fidelity friends at the Shakespeare and Company bookstore said. It's not about not attaching or leaving your life behind and leaving your wife behind and going and sitting under the Bodh tree. And it's not about seeing the North Star and realizing that the farthest point in the universe is that which comes up through the human heart. It's none of that. Just put the attention on posture. That's it. So Mumon Yamada said the best way to the truth of Buddhism is to do zazen. And I'm telling you, zazen is to sit. And you're not doing it wrong if you don't have big insights, if you don't have satori, if you don't figure out emptiness or no self in an evening. You just sit and let zazen manifest. And you do that over and over and over. And all kinds of temptations to move off the cushion arise, all kinds of distractions, all kinds of other more interesting things come up. None of those things are zazen, even when they're telling you, I'm zazen, I'm Buddhism, I'm truth, I'm more important. The practice is to stay seated and continue, rain or shine, to do zazen. That is zazen. It's interesting, my girlfriend and I go and take these walks, right? And we always get in good conversations, and I'm sitting all day. And so once I hit that path in Protter Park, I want to keep moving. But sometimes when she gets really excited about something, she'll stop and she'll sit there and she'll tell the story. And I feel like I'm like, oh my God, come on, let's move. And when she was doing this recently, I composed myself and I manifested patience and I stopped and I listened to her. And she used to be an architect, and she used to teach architecture at a college in Croatia. And she said, okay, if I had my architecture students with me right now, I would show them this bridge. So there was a bridge extending over the path, and then the Danube River was flowing under it, and the supports for the bridge composed a kind of frame. And she said, look at this. She said, look at how you can see this beautiful Danube flowing along and the trees gently waving over it, the tree branches. She said, you need a frame to see nature truly and beautifully. You need a frame for it. And I was really happy that I didn't rush her along and that I paused and that I turned to hear her story, and then I looked through this frame that the bridge supports were forming, because she was exactly right. It framed the trees waving and the Danube River flowing in this very beautiful way. And it hit me then that in many ways that's what our posture is in zazen. That's what Buddhism itself is. It's just that frame. It's just that frame. Don't get stuck on the frame. Don't get stuck on the finger pointing to the moon, as the old cliche goes. Pay attention to the moon. That's all I have attention for today, my friends. Thank you for listening. If you would like to support this channel, I send you kisses, love, and dharmic hugs from Vienna, and you can do so by clicking on this link right here, which goes to my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Shozan Jack Hobner. So I've got a community there, and I've got writings up on Patreon, and we're doing more meditation sits now. So I feel like a little sangha is developing. I feel like I'm getting to know these people, and it's interesting. Like, you start putting out videos like this, and some people like them, some people don't. People that find a kindred spirit become patrons, and there becomes a kind of a sangha or community. So I'm appreciating that, and I'm liking it. Hit subscribe, hit like, hit notifications if you're digging this channel. Otherwise, catch you next time, Dharma buddies.